Welcome to G20, the India story, a very special series of interviews with key people in the preparation for the G20 conference at the summit level meeting in Delhi from 9th to 10th of September. This is probably the biggest conference of its kind since 1983, when India hosted the non-aligned summit in Delhi. The variety of topics, the importance of the people attending, and the vast preparations that have been made during the last 1 year all make it very special. Our first guest in the series is Ambassador Sujan R Chinoy, who is now the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, after a very distinguished diplomatic career culminating as Ambassador to Japan. Mr. Sujan R Chinoy has worked with me in New York, and I have known him for his competence, his brilliance, and expertise. Welcome, Sujan. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, sir. Very good to be with you this morning.
Well, we'll start by asking you as to what is the role that you are playing in the preparations. I know you are the chairman of what is called T20. I understand this is because of it's a group of think tanks in India you seem to coordinate their work. What is the actual preparation going? How is it going, and what do you expect from your group?
Think 20 is actually the most important engagement group of any G20 presidency, not just India's. In India's case, the Think 20 is certainly not a T20 match. We've been at this for the last 1 year, and we have in fact had 64 meetings, mostly around the country, but a few have been held abroad as well. We have invited roughly 135 scholars, not just from India, but from around the world, to our meetings over the course of the past year. And we have come up with a communique at our summit in Mysore held a month ago. We have 7 engagement groups within the Think 20 engagement group that look at, for instance, macroeconomic issues, fiscal stability, economic recovery, in the aftermath of the pandemic. We look at, for instance, digital public infrastructure, lifestyle for environment. That's the Prime Minister of India's proposal, which is now known as Lifestyle for Sustainable Development. We are also looking in one of our groups at green transitions. Then we are looking at reforms of financial institutions. We are also looking at implementation of SDGs, and we are also looking finally at reformed multilateralism.
The 3 segments that they say, that the Sherpa track, the finance track, and engaging groups. So you fall in the engaging groups category, I presume.
Yes, the engagement groups category is where I fall in, but it is also the most important of the engagement groups, the most well organized, the first to get off to a very quick start the moment the engagement groups were announced. And the fact of the matter is that the Think 20 has a good history. The first Think 20 grouping in any G20 presidency started during the G20 in Mexico. That was way back in 2012, the year I landed there as ambassador. For that matter, even the G7 has a T7 now. And so that T7 was set up about 3 years ago. And the G20 and the G7 obviously work together because the G7 is a part of the G20. But I, as the Think 20 chair, also have very good relations and interaction with the T7 chair, which currently happens to be Japan during Japan's presidency of the G7.
You mentioned the context in which G20 is being held. It's a very situation of crisis in the world. You pointed out the features of that. Of course, it is by chance that we happen to be the president of G20 at this critical moment. But we seem to have seen it as an opportunity to do many things, in the sense that bring the people into the system, very many additional activities, consultations, etc., etc. And on top of it, we have the Russia-Ukraine war dominating the whole world scene. So the areas that we are specializing or consulting or talking about is a vast area. You and I have seen many international conferences, but this seems to be different from them. How, in what way is it different? Is it the way the chairman has taken a lot of initiative, kind of shaping the world in his own, according to his own vision, according to India, as it were? So have you seen any such kind of a conference before in your experience?
The Prime Minister of India has been driving our G20 presidency on the foundational principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one world, one family, one future.
But that itself is new for G20.
It's a huge plus, and moreover, as you know, sir, that the Prime Minister of India has been making great efforts, and so have other leaders and functionaries, to reach out to the global south. In fact, the one great achievement of India is not just to emerge as a voice for the global south, but also to genuinely put the global south agenda front and center during our presidency. And so it is that the Prime Minister of India has said now is not the time for war. We believe that the G20 is not the UN Security Council. As you rightly know, the United Nations Security Council deals with issues of peace and security, but it is the G20 that must focus on issues to do with economic development and macroeconomic stability around the world. And now, when the world is in such great crisis, when all the key vectors of globalization are challenged, whether it is trade, technology, whether it is finance or movement of human resources, when these are so greatly challenged, when the war in Ukraine has only accelerated some of the divisions and difficulties that were already in play as a result of Sino-US friction, and the enormous adversity created by the COVID-19 pandemic. At this point of time, it is India that has succeeded in actually putting the key issues of, for instance, debt distress, high interest rates, lack of food, fuel, finance, and fertilizers for the developing countries. These have been successfully put onto the agenda of the G20. Is this for the first time that an entire country has been involved in its presidency? 1.4 billion people of India have been introduced to the rest of the world. The world has been made ready and prepared for a rising India through our presidency. We have branded India successfully by ensuring that more than 200 events for the main leadership track, for instance, are held all over the country, and that people, even in the districts, get a chance to introduce themselves, our cuisine, our culture, our soft power, our products through this kind of interaction. So I think this is an unprecedented level of engagement with our own people and people around the world in any G20 presidency.
Yes, that is why I was saying that this is an unprecedented kind of conference in the sense of the country's involvement, people's involvement, and projection of India, India's strengths, so the way India has grown, everything else. But would there be not an element of envy among the others when you do a thing like this? Isn't that the reason why there are some noises? The Chinese asking you, why Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam? It is Sanskrit. It is not a language approved in the UN. So things that are being raised also because of the prominence of the chairman in an unprecedented manner.
You see, in the case of China, I read that the Chinese have difficulties with millets, the reference to millets.
Yes.
Why should anyone have problem with reference to millets?
We are only going to the past, isn't it? Millet
is... This is also the year of the millets,
yes,
as declared internationally. So it is not India's year of millets. It's actually an international year of millets. Then if there is a problem with regard to, for instance, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, well, I see no reason why that should be resented, because don't forget, if China has a problem with Sanskrit, I'd be very surprised. 1400 years ago, Huansang, the Chinese pilgrim, and many other Chinese pilgrims came to India, monks, in search of knowledge. And it is this language, Sanskrit, the same one that gives us Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that gave China those scriptures which they took back in order to inform their own people of our Hindu-Buddhist thought and philosophy. You're more likely to hear Sanskrit chants, certainly not in Mandarin, in any Chinese Buddhist monastery, even today.
Right. Anyway, coming back to the point about the Security Council and G20, I am very tempted, in fact, I wrote about it, that G20 is a dream Security Council. In the sense, it has no veto. Secondly, it is much more balanced than a Security Council. So a future Security Council could look like that. And as it happened, the main agenda of the G20 has become the war. Because whatever else you may have accomplished, if there is no consensus on this question, people will still think that it was not a great success. It's unfortunate because G20's role is not that. But since that has happened, will it elicit some kind of interest in reforming the Security Council in the shape of the G20 with some one or two additions? Is that ever possible? Has it crossed your mind?
So, sir, as you know, this reforms of the United Nations, particularly the UN Security Council, have been on the agenda for donkey's years. And since 2007, the intergovernmental negotiations, particularly the text-based negotiations, have gone nowhere. My basic proposition is that global orders are neither created nor dismantled easily. They usually come about as a result of enormous cataclysmic changes. God forbid, we are not looking for that cataclysmic change. We are not looking at, rejecting the current global order, but certainly we are looking for genuine reforms. Now, the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, has seen no reforms since 1965. That was the one and only time when the non-permanent category, after 4 years of discussion in the ECOSOC, the non-permanent category was expanded from 6 to 10, bringing the total membership from 11 to 15. No change thereafter. The point here is that privileged powers who have sought exceptionalism are not likely to give up that power anytime soon. So it is what it is. But you are right in saying that the G20 is a remarkable grouping. It's a great opportunity to actually speak of consensus, dialogue with one another, try and achieve what the multilateral structures otherwise are not able to achieve. But I would add a word of caution. In doing so, the G20 must not seek to usurp the powers of the UN Security Council. You, of course, alluded to the fact that it is democratic. I quite agree with you. There is, in fact, no veto power. It is like a dream grouping. But the powers that are in the G7 or in the UN Security Council, they must realize that this is a group that allows the global consensus to be built. It allows us to go in for low-hanging fruit. It allows even contending parties who don't see eye to eye to get off the gridlock on the highway of multilateralism, to use the G20 as a pull-aside, wayside station where they can actually stretch their legs, have a coffee together, discuss a few things. It is time that the G20 was seen in light of this. And I do not believe that our success, the success of our presidency is hinged to some one single final communique or document. As you know, most such documents, in fact, have, what you call common denominators, the path of least resistance, and therefore, a lot of anodyne stuff is also there. Right. India's real achievement is what it has put on the table over the past year, and that is not going to be washed away by the coming, summit, in the sense whether or not it comes up with some solid communique. What about all the documents that we have published so far? What about all the sentiments that have been expressed? They cannot be wished away or swept under the carpet. So our presidency is already a hugely successful presidency.
If you look at this conference, in a sense, it is reforming multilateralism. We have always been asking for it. And where do you start? You cannot start at the Security Council. So in effect, what India has done is to do a reform process within the system wherever it is possible.
I think the G20, therefore, is indicative of the potential for bringing about some reforms, even at the periphery of the main power structures. And so you're very right in saying that within the G20, we have been able to achieve some consensus. And if we, in the last lap during the summit, can clinch language that everyone can accept, it'll actually be like icing on the cake. But for me, the real cake is what we have done already in the past year. The G20 is the one that's most representative. It has the G7 in it. It has the BRICS in it.
Four
It
candidates,
has
the four candidates.
it has all the four candidates in it. And the EU is there as a regional sort of member, encompassing all 27 members of the EU, in addition to European members.
Maybe African Union may also be brought in eventually.
Yes, and with India trying to bring in the African Union with a fair bit of widespread support, you are actually bringing in the whole continent, 54 countries, and this is a continent that is also, mind you, spoken out in favor of reforms, including UN Security Council reforms. Is it called the L69 document and the Eswatini consensus and all that? The African continent is a very large chunk of humanity. If you're looking at roughly 193 members of the United Nations and roughly 200 odd entities governing themselves around the world, you are looking at more than 25% of that in Africa. Imagine that's not represented in the UN Security Council at all. So it must be represented in this new body that gives us hope. That's the G20.
Just as the European Union is there as a union, could be African Union, could also be.
Exactly.
But that brings me to the issue.
Only good for the gander.
That brings me to the issue of attendance. This has never been an issue at any of the G20 meetings. Now, unfortunately, this has become an issue also. We can understand President Putin cannot come. He is too busy with his own country and his own existence. But China's decision not to come, do you read anything into it? Many people are interpreting, they are saying he doesn't want to come to India because the focus of India-China relations will hurt him, or him meeting, Biden meeting in India is not very good, so he will meet him at Ep-1 meeting in California. So, or too much of attention on him. All these, do these trouble you in any way as far as the outcome of the conference is concerned?
I wouldn't lose any sleep over this. And going back to what you said about envy, the envious people and the doubting Jonases, they are not just external. We have plenty of them within the country who would like to see a failed Indian presidency, so to speak. But let me tell you straight away that I wouldn't lose any sleep over this. Take Russia. President Putin did not attend the G20 summit in Bali. It was the foreign minister.
For the same reason, because he is already engaged in the war. So.
Fair enough. So leaders have their own agendas, they have their own priorities, they have other competing demands on their time. And I would imagine that Mr. Putin has a fair bit of crisis demanding his time. But let me also tell you that at Bali, it was not just the Russian president who was represented by his foreign minister. Brazil was represented by the foreign minister, and so also Mexico. Go back a year further to the G20 summit in Rome, and you are aware that there the Russians had sent their minister of finance, and China, Japan, Mexico, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia. So a total of 6 countries were not represented at the leadership level. In fact, there were 5 foreign ministers and 1 finance minister there. So I'm not at all surprised that China, which did not attend the G20 summit in 2021 at the level of the president, is unable to attend this one at the level of the president. And given the Chinese system, if the Chinese president is not coming, I have no confirmed news, but if he's not coming, as is speculated, I would imagine that he, would send the premier. And the premier is a very senior person. It's like in China, the equivalent of the head of government, as in the Prime Minister, and Premier Li Qiang would be equally welcome. And the outcomes don't change because it's a president or a premier. No states, no governments work on such ad hoc basis.
It has been a very interesting discussion. I'm so grateful that you took time off. I'm sure your phones must be ringing. And I appreciate the fact that you took some time off. And all the very best. Maybe we can have a review after the summit is over.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be on your show, and I'm very grateful to you and to your listeners and viewers for allowing me to come in and share my thoughts this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sujan. G20 ഉച്ചകോടി സമ്മേളനത്തിൽ പ്രവർത്തനത്തിൽ നിരതരായിരിക്കുന്ന മറ്റ് അതിഥികളുമായി നമുക്ക് വീണ്ടും കാണാം ഈ പരിപാടിയിൽ. നമസ്കാരം.
ಇದು ಏಷ್ಯಾನೆಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ನೆಟ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಿ.
ನೀವು ನೋಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಏಷ್ಯಾನೆಟ್ ಸುವರ್ಣ ನ್ಯೂಸ್.